Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 113 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're speaking with director Zeke Zelker. He's the man behind Billboard, a new indie film focusing on a small business owner willing to get creative to help his father's radio station survive. Zeke's got some really cool lessons to share about perseverance, capitalism, and much more. Hollywood accidentally kicked off the MeToo movement thanks to the open secret named Harvey Weinstein. Stars pounced, and for two good reasons. The culture where men can sexually intimidate women doesn't end at Tinseltown's borders, and the more stars spoke out, the better the odds that another Weinstein would never gain power. Turns out Hollywood cared only about select abusers, though. Consider the lack of outrage over Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax. He's been credibly accused of sexual assault by not one but two women. Have any stars marched to drum him out of office? We're still waiting. More recently, former Vice President Joe Biden has been hit with a new wave of creepy touching stories. Now, to be fair, it's a far, far cry from anything that Harvey Weinstein did or other predators that have been caught in recent months. But still, darn creepy, darn inappropriate. Yet, where's the outcry from Hollywood? Oh yeah, Joe Biden is a major Democratic player and could in theory square off against Trump in 2020. So it's time to either stay very, very silent or protect Biden's name if you can. Just ask Rosanna Arquette, Alyssa Milano, and Whoopi Goldberg. Each star ran defense for Biden in their own curious ways. Of course, without our hopelessly corrupt media raising a single eyebrow about the hypocrisy. What gives? Why aren't we seeing Kavanaugh-sized marches and outcries from Hollywood? It's politics, and what a shame. You know, Hollywood helped start a really necessary movement in our culture following Weinstein's fall from grace. But now, it looks like just another part of the industry's partisan machinery, stopping and starting depending on the letter before an alleged attacker's name. Just sad.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
Here's the HiT tweet of the week. Joss Whedon makes a welcome return to the HitCast. The talented director, I will always love his Avengers movie, is as nasty as possible on Twitter sometimes. And of course, that also convinces him to stay off of Twitter for a spell. It's what happened, I think it was about last year or so, when he mocked some cancer-stricken teens just to own the GOP. Well, he's back getting political on Twitter, and we couldn't be happier. More voices, not less, as Andrew Breitbart famously said, and I love it when liberals really reveal their true colors. For context, here's Joss commenting on how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez refused to listen when outgoing Representative Paul Ryan gave her some generous advice. Interesting photo choices, like AOC, wasn't paying attention to Ryan because she's a self-involved teen, and not because he's a useless monster who understands nothing about public service. Just remember, anyone who tells you the Hollywood hate is all about President Trump, they're lying.
You're listening to my daddy's podcast. He still sleeps with the nightlight on.
My HiT tip of the week is 1922. Actor Thomas Jane stars in the Stephen King adaptation that got so little press during its 2017 release. I was really surprised by that. He stars as a turn-of-the-century farmer fighting with his wife about the future of their farm and their family. Jane's character does a bad, bad thing, to quote Chris Isaac, and boy does he live to regret it. 1922 is technically a horror film for sure, but it's not about gore and violence and high body counts. It's more somber in a way. It's more about texture and consequences and humanity. But it's Jane's performance that really stands out to me. Now, I've been watching this guy for years, maybe decades on screen. I didn't recognize him. I had to check IMDb to find out who this actor is. He looked familiar, and Jane's name did pop through my mind, but I wasn't sure it was him. Now, he's not wearing any makeup or anything outrageous that would disguise him. He's just deep in character. So deep, he looks different. He sounds different, too, but the visual, it's what's really stunning about his performance. It's amazing, and I'm kind of surprised it didn't get more attention. And his performance alone is enough reason to recommend this movie. But otherwise, it's really different and smart and well-planned and just odd. It gets under your skin, and that's kind of what you want from a horror movie. 1922 is a Netflix original, so naturally, that's where you can see it right now.
I'm Patrick Corelchi.
And I'm Adriana Cortez, and we're the hosts of Red Pilled America, a new storytelling podcast.
Red Pilled America is not another talk show covering the day's news. We are all about telling stories. Stories Hollywood doesn't want you to hear. Stories the media mocks. Stories about everyday Americans that the elites ignore. You could think of Red Pilled America as audio documentaries, and we promise only one thing: the truth.
Visit the iHeartRadio app right now to listen to Red Pilled America.
Now let's get to this week's HitCast interview. I have a weakness for interviewing indie filmmakers. They're not rich, they're rarely famous, and they have to fight for every career inch they get. And that's assuming their projects ever get off the ground. Many movie ideas just never see the light of a theater. It's one reason why I wanted to chat with Zeke Zelker. He's a warm-hearted fellow who refused to give up on his big screen idea. His movie Billboard took 10 years to make, but the story spoke to him so deeply he just couldn't let it go. I like that. Billboard follows an entrepreneur struggling to take over his late father's radio station. To save that station and his father's legacy, he gets a bit creative with a billboard sitting contest where 4 people have to compete to win a mobile home and $960,000. Billboard's playing in select Pennsylvania theaters right now, expanding to LA soon, and then going to even more theaters down the road. You can go to billboardmovie.com for all the details on the screenings. For now, here's my chat with director Zeke Zelker. Well, Zeke, your new film, one of the many things that jumps out at me about Billboard is the behind-the-scenes story, the 10-year struggle to make this actually alive and well and in theaters. It's, independent films are never easy to make. Sometimes it takes years. A decade is certainly a long time. But, I don't want to – I'm sure it's a very exaggerated tale, but kind of boil it down for us. What is the tenacity that you required or you had that made it possible, and what did you learn along the way? Because I'm sure there's many a lesson to be gleaned from this.
Oh, absolutely, Christian. The interesting thing is, too, is even Hollywood films take a long time to put together.
Oh, yeah.
So like just filmmaking as a whole. The interesting thing is a lot of people feel that films come out a lot quicker than they do. Generally, people are toiling on these things for years prior to them. But because of the press cycles and everything else, people just aren't aware of it. But some of the things that we had to overcome to make Billboard – oh gosh, where do I start? The most recent one, as we got ready to distribute the film, our distributor passed away. Mark Ehrman, who was the president of Paladin, before that Lionsgate, and also Think Film, and his entire company is built around him. And so, literally, we were left without a distributor. And so, we've had to figure out what to do about that. So we're booking theaters ourselves, and it's a matter of because we couldn't stop. We're too far in it to stop at this point.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? So we just had to keep going. And but there's just been a lot of different challenges and obstacles along the way. But also too is how I'm telling the story is very different, and so there's always been a bit of a learning curve for people to understand how I'm telling the story. But obviously funding's always a challenge. We've been doing this thing off of cash flow instead of getting a huge equity investment, which also took a little bit of time as well. So that's kind of like a couple of things, but sure. I'm sure there's more as we chat.
Well, how do you kind of prepare yourself emotionally for that? Like, how do you rally when there is a hiccup, when there is a delay, when there is a stalling effort? Because that happens time and time again with a project, of any kind of project, really. How do you kind of gird yourself to know this is the long haul, this is the way it's got to be, and I just need to kind of buckle down and make sure it happens?
Well, I kind of think about it like being back in the boxing ring. That I'm going to get hit and I'm going to stagger a little bit, but I still have to keep getting up. That's the biggest thing. It's a matter of just realizing that all these things are just obstacles in the road to success, and it's a matter of staying positive and having positive people around you. And those people that see the vision, and as we're all working towards that vision, because the hardest thing is when you have adversity, you're leading other people, and for them to realize that you will overcome it together as a team. And so you actually have to be even more prepared mentally and also physically, quite honestly, to keep overcoming. And that's a big thing. It's a matter of realizing that people aren't just taskmasters, and it's a matter of like having them involved with the creative process, so they understand when something goes awry that collectively you have to fix it or overcome it.
Billboard is based partially on a true story, and I wonder maybe you can share a little bit about that particular incident and what are the key elements? Is it just the thrust of what happened that made it into your movie, or what's sort of the connective tissue between the two?
Sure. So it's loosely based on a competition that took place in 82. I remember this from a kid, and it always stuck with me because I became more interested in what was going on behind the scenes than it was a spectacle itself. Like imagine at that time it was 3 people living on a billboard, and the crazy things that they'd have to do and overcome, and then the weather changing and everything else. So the project is loosely based on that idea, but I don't really know or remember much about the actual contest itself. But we focused more so on the radio station in the film because I wanted to be about, the man behind the spectacle, almost like, in The Wizard of Oz, who Oz would be, and those sorts of things, and a matter of the perseverance that somebody has to endure when they're thrust into a situation that they weren't prepared for, and what do you do in preparation for that. But then also, too, at the same time, taking a note from what's going on in our society today is how the press plays a part in one's success or failure. We all have a lot of power in our hands now thanks to social media. And so the biggest thing is a matter of realizing what the story was originally and the mayhem that ensued around it, and then bringing it into today. And there's a different type of mayhem.
Yeah. This strikes me like kind of the old school radio contest that we've gotten to know through the years, and it feels like a piece of Americana in a way. It's curious, it's odd. Talk about and I don't know how many times they're done these days. I think with the rise of podcasting, I think the economic situation in the country, the radio stations have been either shuttering or getting smaller or going to sort of nationally syndicated hosts. Talk about that part of the movie because I'm fascinated by it, and I think there's so much to be told just from that perspective.
Oh, absolutely. So the biggest compliment that I've been getting is people that are in radio that see this thing tell me how authentic it is. Okay. And so like I cannot be more proud of that fact. The interesting thing is the reason that there's not all these crazy contests anymore is basically because of litigation. People doing stupid things to win stuff and getting themselves hurt, and then, of course, then suing the radio station. So that's the big reason why there's not contests anymore, is because of how litigious our society has become. But the interesting thing about it is a matter of like, how I told the story and how I'm trying to even in the marketplace of how we're positioning it is a matter of like bringing the fun back to something that is traditional and things that people recall and remember. Some of the things that we're doing in theaters is like, we'll find out how many people are in the theater at a given showing, and we're going to run around and hand out free stuff based off of the content. Kind of like, playing back to cinema in the 1940s when you go to a theater and you get something out of it. And so it's a matter of like, and also too is with this contest, it's a matter of giving somebody the opportunity to get ahead and actually fulfill their own dreams by giving them an opportunity. Because a lot of people, I feel, in today's day and age just aren't given different opportunities anymore. They kind of see one thing and just that's all they see. And it's a matter of like just kind of like, doing something different.
Yeah, so that tunnel vision seems like the right path. But if you're more open to different opportunities, then something else could come along the way that's just as good, if not better.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's a matter of, keeping eyes wide open. Mm-hmm.
One of the things
so many of us are closed in, so.
Yeah. Capturing what it means to be a small business person isn't really easy necessarily on screen. I mean, there have been like The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith is more sort of larger than life. And your film has a kind of a more narrow focus. Talk about getting that across on the screen, because I think it's so fascinating and so important, and yet at the same time, it doesn't always kind of strike us as cinematic in a way. It seems like it's more minutia involved than sort of the broad strokes we're used to.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I was at a startup last week in Philadelphia, and the owner who saw Billboard in Philadelphia at a sneak preview literally said to one of her employees, "It's like the best horror film for entrepreneurs." Because people don't realize the risk that entrepreneurs take. And so we really try to show that off, and also too is like how things affect one that's ill prepared for business, for that matter. And so it's a matter of, it was a dance, and to make it cinematic, to make it visual, to realize the challenges that one faces. Like, it's interesting. It's like, imagine if you took the story of Rocky, right? Being in a ring, boxing and so forth, preparing yourself, you're taking a beating, but then taking that same sort of idea, but applying it to business. A lot of business owners take beatings often. They're oftentimes worried about payroll. They're worried about marketing. They're worried about like how they're positioning their product in the marketplace. So it's literally the same sort of idea as Rocky, for lack of a better of an example, but literally how it applies to business. And so there is a lot of cinematic chances you have of isolation, of piling on, of success, of failure, how tides change, and so forth. So it just took. It's interesting because it took time away. I had to take time away from the creation of it to see it. And so a lot of my people that work for me feel that it's become somewhat autobiographical, but it is what it is.
Interesting. I was reading up on one of your co-stars in the film, Eric Roberts, and if you've looked at his IMDb page recently, there are roughly 1,000 movies he's got on his schedule. I was kind of curious if you could maybe share some anecdotes about him on the set. Obviously, Oscar-nominated actor, memorable in Sony performances. What was your experience like with him on the set?
Eric is, lack of a better term, a rock star. He works really, really hard. And he is on the entire time he's on set. I've never seen an actor like him. It was interesting because the role that he played in Billboard is so much different than what Leah Fitzpatrick and Heather Matarazzo and John play, where they're like independent radio station DJs that are kind of like, they kind of meander, and they're they're not as aggressive and so forth, where Eric plays a very aggressive role like corporate radio and so forth. And it's interesting of his charisma, what he brought to the table. And but he was just a great to work for, or great to work with, I should say, not for. But it was intense, really intense. And but also too, it was awesome because he appreciated that I was prepared. He appreciated that I actually knew what I wanted. So it was awesome to work with him. It was really awesome to work with him.
Gotcha. You're from Pennsylvania. You've got strong roots there, and the film was shot in Pennsylvania. Talk about that sort of the pride in the state and in that region, and also how does that manifest itself in the work you do? Not even just Billboard, but other projects you've been attached to.
Yeah, so I was raised in Allentown, Pennsylvania. My family came here in 1884. They were butchers. They immigrated from France. They were butchers in Philadelphia and couldn't find work, so they came here and started a catering company. And to sell more food, they started an amusement park. That amusement park is called Dorney Park. It still exists in Allentown. So my family's been here since the late 1800s, and so I have a lot of pride for the area. And then in the 80s, this guy by the name of Billy Joel created this song called Allentown, which literally made my hometown seem like a garbage pit, which is not the case whatsoever. And so after grad school, I decided to move home to make a difference, to make films in my hometown where I could create an economic benefit and also show off the area to the world. And so I made it my mission over 20 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since. And so every single one of my films is pretty much, shot in Pennsylvania, not always set there, but they're at least shot here. And and it's been great and a challenge at the same time, because one is it's been great because I can do kind of what I want. And I have a lot of creative flexibility. But then the challenge, though, is then when it comes to dealing with people in the industry, it becomes a little bit more challenging because we have to bring everybody into town to be able to shoot. But I love shooting here. It's beautiful. You'll see it in the film of how beautiful, and there's a lot of texture here as well, and there's so much history here. So that's kind of like why I set the film here. Talk
a little bit about the jobs, or at least the impact a film has on the community. you think, okay, maybe local craftsmen, maybe local hotels get booked up. What are some of the maybe kind of drill down a little bit deeper? Because I'm fascinated by the impact that a single project can have on a community. I think it could be rather dramatic at times. And obviously there's the whole debate about tax cuts and luring the different productions to town. But what maybe kind of for those who aren't well versed in this topic, what can you share about it that maybe people don't think about automatically?
Sure. So my undergrad was in economics and finance, so I can actually talk about this very intelligently.
Perfect. So
it's interesting is because, like, let's say you have $1 million film, the budget's $1 million. There's actually a multiplier that economists use. It's a 2.5 multiplier that sends waves throughout the community or throughout the community economically, basically meaning that let's say you have extras and your extras are in town, like they're in downtown that day, and they have a 2-hour break. They're going to go and spend money in that area. And so that 2.5 multiplier is like what's the overall economic impact for your community upon shooting in that area. That's one reason why I see all these tax credits throughout the country, is because economists have come to realize that. That's the first one, is literally talking purely economics. The second thing that influences the economics of it as well is the feel good aspect and the tourism aspect of it that promoters of the state can then promote. Like, oh, this film was shot here or this film was shot there. And so there's a sense of pride that exists then as well, because it just isn't the actual budget that is spent in that area. There's promotion because the film was shot there. It's a very long tail in terms of the economic benefit. And so that's the big reason why everybody's trying to lure films to their states. Like, in fact, it's interesting because in Pennsylvania, I had a challenge securing tax credits because I produce off of my company's cash flow. So I didn't qualify because I couldn't qualify for a $600,000 budget because I do it off of cash flow over the course of time, where they want all that money in the bank. And then I could have qualified. So like that model doesn't work for me, unfortunately.
Interesting.
So unfortunately, with that being said, a lot of the tax credits are built more so for big studio films, and the little guys are pretty much left in the dust, unfortunately.
That's a shame. In a way, it's a great time for independent filmmakers because the technology has kind of reduced the barrier. You can make an indie film look amazing, where maybe that wasn't possible during the 60s or 70s. But at the same time, I feel like things get dwarfed by the Dumbos, the Avengers of the world. Are you optimistic as an indie filmmaker that things are getting better, getting worse, or is there, for every step forward, there's a couple steps back?
Definitely, you're constantly, doing the box step and Walt's box step. I can tell you that. So if anybody doesn't know what that means, it's like basically one to the right, one back. It's like a matter of like you're constantly going in some sort of circular motion. But the challenge is because there is the ability to make things look great. There's been such an influx of film, and the challenge that we have is so many filmmakers feel that they make a film, they need to get into Sundance or South by Southwest, and they look at it as a lottery system. Mm-hmm. I don't look at it that way. I look at the long tail, and I look at creating a body of work. But there's a lot of gatekeepers in my industry, an enormous amount of gatekeepers. And like, for instance, right now my gatekeepers are theater owners and theater bookers, and we have a quality film in our hands. We have a film that people will be able to relate to. We have a film that that we already know have people have seen time and time again. They followed the thing around to different locations around the state where we're showing it, which is kind of crazy. Well, we have Billboard groupies, but it just is interesting. Is a matter of there's always going to be gatekeepers, and unfortunately, a lot of the big theater chains want to go with the Hollywood stuff that constantly is the same thing. They're not taking many risks on storytelling. Like, for instance, Us, that was just released last week, is probably the most, so far this year, is the most successful, what's the word I'm looking for? Most successful.
Smaller budgeted?
No, not smaller budgeted. No, the most successful non-sequel, something based on a book ever. Like, I'm trying to think of the word.
Original?
Oh my God. Original. There it is. Thank you. Oh my gosh.
You know what?
Wow.
It's so rare you forgot what the word is. That's why.
I know. No kidding. No kidding. So that's a challenge that we have is that if people went out and supported more original content, there would be more of it made. And unfortunately, Hollywood wants to mitigate risks. So that's one reason why they do all these repeats and remakes and sequels and, things off of books and so forth. But I'm telling you, though, I don't know how much the audience is going to be challenged by doing that, though.
Yeah, well, it's a vicious cycle. People always complain, oh, I'm sick of these remakes, and they line up for every remake possible. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. As a filmmaker, how would you kind of describe your own learning curve as you've kind of grown along the years? What's different about your approach today than maybe you were doing 10, 15 years ago?
I take my time now instead of rushing. Before I would have anxiety, like, oh my gosh, I got to get this thing made. Oh my gosh, I have to get through production. Oh my gosh, I got to get through post. Oh my gosh, I got to get to theaters. Now I've realized that in my age, things should take a little bit of time. Mm-hmm. Honestly, not as long as Billboard took us though, because I lost some opportunities because of that. But it's a matter of like letting things sit and simmer. Because as it's just like a great recipe, the longer and slower you cook it, the kind of like more interesting and more nuanced it becomes. And it's very much, like how I've learned over the course of years. And also, too, as I realize that cast really does matter. You do need to have people that people recognize or people think that are appealing in your films instead of, your brother and sister, And so that's the other thing is like, kind of every project I work on, we get more and more like name talent in it. But also it's just a matter of taking time and surrounding yourself with some great people. That's the other thing, too, is like before I thought I could do everything myself, and now I realize I can't at all.
Superman syndrome.
I try to do a lot. Yeah. I try and do as much as I can, but at the same time, you have to rely on experts.
I went to art school many years ago, and one of the things I noticed about it was I graduated and I thought, I don't know how to make a career out of this. I could draw naked people based on all those life drawings, but I didn't know what to do next. And I think a lot of artists have that dilemma where they have the aesthetic ability, but they can't sort of put it together in a successful package. How important has it been for your career to have that economic background, to kind of have the building blocks that you can kind of use along with your artistic eye?
It's interesting because we work with a lot of different types of artists. My company does, and we actually work with fine artists as well. But that's absolutely right. It's a matter of I firmly believe that more people shouldn't necessarily go to film school. They should go to business school and learn coding because so much of my business now has become tech oriented. That you actually have to understand how apps and websites and mobile activity works, and so you can build out better story worlds and things. But I love the idea of like as an artist, it's a craft, right? You are probably a better artist now than you were when you're 15 years old. And the only way that you became better was by practicing your craft. Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing with filmmakers. It's a matter of like so many people are going to film school and they are not practicing their craft. I'm a very big I don't get me wrong. I'm not saying do not go to school. I love college and everything else. I love to learn. And, my daughters are in college now. But it's just a matter of filmmaking is a craft, and that's the big thing that people have to understand. That you have to practice your craft to get better at it. Going to school and learning theory and going to school and making one film a semester is not enough. You could literally work on films, and we'll learn more by working on films than you can in a classroom. And so it's interesting as a matter of people have to realize that, again, filmmaking is a craft and you have to work it. You have to, and also it's a body of work as well. And that just like any other artist, like one band's albums don't sound the same every album. They learn things from the first one and they change in the second one, or they're getting bored by the third one and they completely change the sound in the fourth one. That's the same sort of approach that filmmakers should take as well.
Yeah, interesting. And I even though fans may miss the old style, I think that if they're true fans of the artist, they'll kind of go along with that journey. Before we let you go, Zeke, 10-year journey is over. The film's hitting theaters now. Do you have a next project? Is it sort of kind of taking a deep collective breath and before you begin, or what can we expect from you next?
No, I'm literally developing my next project already.
Can you tease it a bit, or is it still too soon?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. It is a film called Love Hereafter. and it is about a child advocate attorney living in Washington, D.C., who falls in love with a ballerina from the ballet that I wrote called Love Decide, and how they break down the barriers of their past to trust one another to fall in love. So it's my version of a love story, in other words.
I like it. That sounds good. Well, thank you again, Zeke, for joining the HiTcast. Of course, Zeke's new film is Billboard. It's in select theaters now. For more theater dates, you can visit the show notes page at HollywoodInToto.com, or, of course, go to BillboardMovie.com. Zeke, I really appreciate you keeping the entrepreneurial spirit alive both on and off screen, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodInToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodInToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.